I want to point out an interesting verbal anomaly that we have. The Torah in this week's Parsha discusses for us the dietary laws of kosher species of animals. And it tells us which animals are kosher, which animals are not kosher. The word kosher doesn't appear in the Torah. It says either tahor or tameh. Tahor means it's pure, tameh means it's impure. But we have evolved that terminology into kosher or non-kosher, or kosher or treif. The Torah lists 3 different animals that only have that, they have split hooves. They don't have split hooves, but they chew their cud. So these are animals who are not kosher because you need to have both split hooves and chew your cud. We know the pig has split hooves but doesn't chew its cud. So the pig looks kosher externally, but internally it's not kosher. But there are 3 animals that externally you can tell that they're not kosher because they don't have split hooves, even though they may be ruminants, they may chew their cud. So what are the 3 animals? The Torah says, and this is Pasuk Daled, Hey, and Vav in Perek Yud Aleph. It says, Et Hagamal. The first one is the camel. If you've ever looked at a camel's feet, it really more has like toes instead of hooves. So therefore it's not a kosher animal, even though it chews its cud, right? Camels disgustingly chew their cud. Okay? Ki ma'ale geirahu, it chews its cud. Ufarsa, that's the underlined portion. Ufarsa einenu mafris. So circle that word mafris for just a second, all right? If you have a pen, circle that word mafris. Let's go to Pasuk Hey. Ve'et hashafan. The second animal is the shafan, which they sometimes translate as a hare or a hyrax. Ki ma'ale geirahu, it chews its cud. Ufarsa lo yafris, but it does not have split hooves. So circle the word yafris. First pasuk said what? Mafris. Second pasuk says yafris. Okay? Now let's take a look at pasuk vav. Ve'et ha'arnevet, and the rabbit. Ki ma'alas geirahi, it chews its cud. Ufarsa lo hifrisa, but does not have split hooves. So circle the word hifrisa. So you've got, now the hey at the end is because the word arnevet is a feminine word. So that's not a problem. But the problem is the hey at the beginning. You've got the first one, when we talked about the camel, it was mafris. When we talked about the hyrax, it was yafris. When we talk about the rabbit, it is hifris or hifrisa. What are we doing? Different tenses. Very good.
Future.
No. The binyan we're not focused. They're all the same binyan. But what's the difference is the tense. One is present tense. Mafris is present tense. Yafris is future tense. And hifris or hifrisa is past tense. Okay, you with me? Okay, did you ever notice that before?
No.
Did you ever notice that before? Okay, so there are a number of commentaries who discuss this. If you want a very intellectual, scientific approach, take a look at the Malbim. We're not going to examine the Malbim today. There are others who look at a Musar-oriented approach, and they say, in a generic way, if you want to declare something to be not kosher, you have to take into account not just what's in front of you, you got to look at the past and the future as well. Right? It's a sort of like a Musar lesson of don't be so quick to declare something to be treif. You have to look at its past and in its future before you're ready to disqualify. Okay? But let's take a look at the Ishbitzer, the Mei HaShiloach, the Ishbitzer Rebbe, who tells us as follows. He says, and this is the Rashi script that you have in the center of the page, he says, B'gamal ketiv parsa inenu mafris lashon hoveh, u'v'shafan ketiv lo yafris lashon atid, u'v'arnevet ketiv lo hifrisa lashon avar. He observes the same thing, that one is present tense, one is future tense, and one is past tense. So he tells us this is all apropos to the animal in question. V'ha'inyan bazeh ki gamal moreh al mihirut. He says, what does the word gamal represent? A camel represents swiftness. V'zeh ma'di'ita b'masechah Shabbos, my time of mahader apei de gimel lagabi dalas. The Gemara says that the letter Gimel, which is like the word Gamal, letter Gimel and Gamal are related. Why is the letter Gimel have its left leg sticking out towards the Dalet? Shekain derech gomle chasadim lirdof achar dalim. Because Gomel dalim, Gimel dalid. You know that famous statement the rabbis say that Gimel dalid is, the Gimel represents the person wishing to give tzedakah. So he runs after, like with that foot sticking out, he's running after the dal, the poor person, which is represented by the dalit. So you're supposed to be running after, with alacrity, run after the poor person to make sure that he gets his donation. But there's sometimes, that's the benefit of being quick to action. But sometimes there's a deficit in being quick to act. There's an impulsiveness that is not good. Because sometimes people can be rush, and it's something that's very unsavory. People don't appreciate being rushed and being hurried. So he says, therefore, the camel, which represents this kind of rushing, this hurriedness, you can detect it right away when it's in front of you. It's not very likable when people display a very rushed kind of attitude. Yeah, quickly, what do you want to tell me? Hurry up. B'zeh inyan ot gimel keshehu b'yud morel gemilot chasadim shelo b'yud morel mihirut hanikra gamal. So therefore, the word gamal represents this idea of this unsavory kind of rushing, which is detectable right there, prima facie, right in front of you. V'inyan shafan, so what does the hyrax represent? Hu hanireh livnei adam liyishuv hada'at va'anava. So the hyrax, I'm not familiar with too many hyraxes, but he says that the hyrax represents humility. It's a desert kind of rodent. It represents humility. Achlo bezot bachar Hashem yitbarach. But sometimes God does not want us to be overly humble. V'hu inyan shenitba'er b'pasuk vayotiru mimenu anashim. When we look at the story of the manna in Parshas Beshalach, it says that certain people left over their man, even though Moshe told them, don't leave over any man overnight. But what was the real reason why people left over their man? Ki heim hecheziko et atzmam la'anavim b'ma shehotiru. Pen lo yihiyu kadaim be'inei Hashem yitbarach sheyazmin lahem man al yom machar. People left over man not because they didn't believe in Moshe, but because they didn't believe in themselves. They didn't have confidence that if God performed a miracle for them on day one, that God would also provide a miracle for them on day two. They didn't have confidence in themselves. They felt they were not worthy. And that's why people left over man to the next day. V'zehu anavat pesula shelo bachar ba Hashem yitbarach. And this is a kind of disqualified humility. God doesn't want you to be so humble that you can't follow through on the Torah's commandments because you feel you're unworthy. And therefore, you can't look at yourself totally worthless. They basically took the position that all the other Jews are worthy of the miracle and we're not worthy. You can't do that. You can't say to yourself, I'm not like other people. That's really very poor self-esteem. That's very unhealthy. He says that's a kind of humility that may appear to be very admirable in the eyes of other people. No, I'm sorry, I'm not worthy. I'm not kedai. Any kedai, I'm not worthy. But Hashem knows, and therefore Hashem presents to us what is the future of that kind of humility that makes you feel unworthy of even being part of a holy congregation. The worms permeate the man that you left overnight. He says that's why worms were the appropriate punishment. Misplaced humility, what do you get? Worms. Worms are the attribute of humility. He says sometimes there's an appropriate humility, like King David's humility. And he says that's why the shafan is in the future tense. The shafan's flaw, which makes it not a kosher animal, is its humility. The negativity of humility is only manifest after the fact. Like the people who left over their mun until the morning, and after the fact it filled with worms, it became wormy. So that's why the idea of not having split hooves is written in the future tense, because the lack of kosher status of the shafan, which represents humility, is only manifest in the future, not in the present. And then finally, v'ha'ar nevet. What does the rabbit represent? Moreh la'az panim. Moreh la'az panim. It represents chutzpah, impudence. I don't know why a rabbit. I mean, I think unless you're thinking about Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny is a very impudent rabbit. He's a screwy rabbit. But again, these are probably mystical concepts that are well beyond me. But he says the rabbit represents impudence, chutzpah. Sha'af sharoa she'en b'shorsho shum chayim klal mikol makom yirtzeh she'ifol kirtzono. He says the rabbit really doesn't have very much going for it, but it just does whatever it wants. That's a chutzpah. V'zehu chutzpah klatei shemayam. That's what God considers to be arrogance and impudence. Kemo shenisbar b'bilam harasha sha'af sha'amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo melech mikol makom hitametz. That was like Bilam. Bilam is compared in Kabbalistic literature to the rabbit because he thought that he could be someone special even though he had nothing going for him. V'zehu raya sheyesh chisaron b'shorsho. But that's indicative of the fact that there's something in your past, in your very roots, that has imbued you with this sense of entitlement and impudence. And that's why it's written in the past tense. Because when you see a chutzpahdik person, you have to look into their past, into their pedigree, and see what is it about their upbringing or about their parentage that made them act this way. So that's why, says the Ishbitzer, they're written, the camel is in present tense because you can see right away that haste makes waste, and a hasty person is a negative character. You don't want to deal with that. That's in the present. The shafan represents humility, and therefore you only see the adverse effects of misplaced humility after the fact. That's why it's written in the future tense. And the rabbit represents arrogance and impudence. And when you see someone who is really filled with chutzpah and a sense of entitlement, you have to conclude that there's something in their past that caused them to feel this way. And that's why it's written, their non-kosher status is written in the past tense. I just wanted to add one more commentary. I'm going to tell you what I think. The Ishbitzer is a beautiful pshat, but I have something that I think is a little bit more easy to digest. No pun intended. At the very end of the kosher laws, the Torah says the reason why you need to abide by these laws is Ki ani Hashem hama'aleh eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am God who has brought you out of Eretz Mitzrayim. Now, notice it says hama'aleh, which also has to do with ma'aleh geirah, chewing its cud. But we'll leave that aside for a second. I have elevated you out of the land of Egypt, lios lachem le'elokim, to be to you unto a God. V'isem kidoshim ki kadosh ani, you shall be holy because I am holy. I want to just observe that the kosher laws is really a very important paradigm shift from everything that came before it in the Torah. Up until this point in the Torah, there were foods that were forbidden for the Jewish people to ingest. But they were foods that were forbidden for specific times and places. So, for example, the Torah gives the commandment to not eat leaven for 7 days over Passover. That's already given when the Jews are leaving Egypt. So the Jewish people are familiar with the concept of forbidden food. They're familiar with the concept of not eating korbanot in certain places, or if you're not a Kohen, or if you're tameh, if you're impure. But those are all temporary conditions limited to certain times and certain places. It's only here where the Torah introduces us to the concept that in all times and places there are certain species of animals that you do not have permission to ingest, to place into your body. And really, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is introducing to the Jewish people by saying this and juxtaposing it against all of the other previous laws is that Hashem is telling us, when I took you out of Egypt, and I prohibited you certain substances for limited periods of time, like not eating chametz for 7 days, I don't want you to think that I only wanted you to be holy during Pesach. The goal is that when you limit yourself to eating only matzah and not eating chametz for 7 days, that's supposed to have a lingering and lasting effect, because when I took you out of Egypt, it wasn't to be periodic observers. It was to be an observant Jew at all times, because I brought you to me to be your God for all times and all places. That's why I took you out of Egypt. And what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is introducing to the Jewish people is the concept that holiness is not consigned to a particular time or a particular place. And that, I believe, is why the Torah is speaking in present, future, and past. Specifically when it comes to the kosher animals, because it's trying to communicate to us, for the first time in the Torah, that there are certain kinds of items that you cannot ingest just by virtue of the fact that you are a Jew. Doesn't matter what time of day it is, doesn't matter what day it is, doesn't matter where you are in the world, whether it's the future, whether it's the present, or whether it's the past, you will always be with Hashem, and Hashem has these great expectations of you. And I think that's an important message for us to take with us as we leave Pesach. We're just a couple of days out of Pesach. It's so easy to put that in our rear view mirror and to say that the prohibition of chametz is a thing of the past. But really, it's not a thing of the past. The lesson of the prohibition of chametz and all that it represents about the haughtiness and the artificiality of the world around us, and about the facade of what reality really is, should linger with us for all time and for all place, just like many of the kosher laws that we read about in Parsha Shemini do. Okay?